Talk about Mary Seacole.
Thank you very much, Tony, and it's always a great pleasure to be invited to take part in any event that Tony organises, and obviously this time in collaboration with Nia, so thank you. So what I'm going to do, I will be skipping some slides because some of the information has already been discussed either in the horrible histories or in, I think mainly in the horrible histories. And what I'm going to try and do is take a look at some recent history in respect of Mary Seacole and the responses to it. So let's first of all start in the new year. Just before the new year, 29th of December, the Daily Mail had leaked to it deliberately from the government proposed changes to the national curriculum, the history section of the national curriculum. And apparently there was a leaked letter, so I'm asking you to look on the left-hand side of the article. This was to do with a letter that was leaked to the Mail, and later on I'm going to talk to you about the rapid response from the community, which had a successful outcome with this particular issue. But I just want to mention also, 2 days later, again in the Mail, was an article that repeated many aspects. This article was not an original article. It was a rehash of perceptions that Mary Seacole basically is a myth and is a sort of, or the achievements of Mary Seacole are myths, and that it's really been created by politically correct individuals. And so what I'm going to be doing is looking at both those aspects in terms of the responses to them. So a very important organisation that took a very important lead on this was Operation Black Vote. And if you want to explore some of the references in more detail that I'm going to give you, I really would suggest you just take a note of Operation Black Vote's website. And just if you go to obv.org.uk, then you're going to be able to access at least 2 of the articles I'm going to be mentioning. The first one is by Simon Woolley, who's the director of Operation Black Vote. And I think you might find this quite an interesting blog that he wrote on about the 6th of February. His view about, as he called them, wretched detractors of Mary Seacole. Also on the Operation Black Vote site is an article that Simon Woolley invited me to write. It ended up as a 2,500 word evidence-based article that looked at some of the myths that have been being mentioned, not just from that Mail article of the 29th of December, but going back so many years. People like Ron Liddell in The Spectator, for example, etc. And I pick out 3 of those so-called myths that the detractors are saying are so-called myths about Mary Seacole. Firstly, that Mary Seacole never ever called herself a nurse, and she wasn't recognised as somebody who nursed in the war zone in the Crimean War. The second so-called myth is that Mary Seacole should not be considered as a black historical figure. I'll come back to these points later, but this is just to give you an idea of what I'm focusing on in terms of this presentation, and it's all contained in this article. And that Mary Seacole was never awarded the medal she is seen wearing in various images. So I'm really impressed with this series. Where's Tony gone? Gone out the room. Well, tell him when he comes back. I'm Neo. Impressed with this series because this is an opportunity for black female academics to have a platform on areas, as we've heard, an up-and-coming doctoral candidate earlier, and it's very rare to have such platforms. So this is, I'm just going to tell you that this is my, I'm supposed to be retired, but you know sometimes certain things just get on your goat, and I had thought I'd stop writing, because I get backache when I'm at the computer now. I'm getting old, I know I don't look it, but I am. But when Simon gave me the opportunity to reply, initially he said in, about 400 to 600 words. I said, Simon, I can't do it. This is the professor hat, I'm afraid, as we say in the aka perspective. I couldn't do it because I really wanted to pull out the evidence as we have and also flag up the evidence that we don't have. You need to look at it from both ends. So that was what I was able to do. So if you want to look at that in depth, the quickest thing would be to go to Operation Black Vote website, and on the right hand side of their front page you'll see the title of this, and it's going to be up there forever, so I'm really pleased about that. So who was Mary Seacole? Now, as I've said, I'll be skipping through some of this so that it's not repeating for you. This, if I only had one slide, would be a summary of the various attributes, achievements of Mary Seacole. And I'm not going to go through it, but I think at a glance you will see that she was a woman of many parts, in fact. And to remind ourselves, she was a Victorian, born at the beginning of the 19th century in 1805 and died in 1881. Now, I'm going to be using sections from her autobiography, which she published in 1857. And this slide is really to demonstrate that actually, and there's more of it in chapter 1 of her autobiography, while she doesn't give us a huge amount of information about her mother and father, their names or, what we'd really be interested in, a lot more information, she does give some information. One aspect that I have felt is that it shows that she's actually quite at ease with her dual identity, of Jamaican Creole origin, excuse me, and Scottish origin. And when people say she's not black, she's not white, she's not Scottish, she's not, I just feel like saying, just read her autobiography. Stop making assumptions about her identity and how she feels about her identity. Because what will surprise people who haven't read it will be that she's actually very at ease, thank you very much, with her origins, both sides of her. So I hope you've had a chance now to see how the influences of her Scottish military father, the impact of that, and also the impact of her Creole, Jamaican, doctress, hotelier mother, because she followed in both their footsteps and merged all these attributes into where her career led her. Now, when people have learned about Mary Seacole, there is an impression that she's the best-known doctress in the world, which, is the case at the moment. But actually, she's not. There was the doctress tradition, of course, is very sound in the Caribbean, for example. And really, I would suggest that the more well-known one was way before Mary Seacole, which was Cuba Cornwallis. And Cuba was born into slavery in Jamaica. We don't know her date of birth, we don't know her year of birth, but we know that she died in 1848 as a very celebrated doctress. And she was celebrated and well known globally, internationally, both internationally because of certain people that were referred to her in the late 1700s. And I just give two examples here. Lord Nelson, who before he was Lord Nelson, many of you will know, he was based in part of his career in Jamaica, Port Royal, and he came down quite ill with dysentery, and such was the reputation of Cuba Cornwallis that the then Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Navy, based in Jamaica, referred Lord Nelson to Cuba Cornwallis. And so impressed was Lord Nelson that he constantly talked about her, wrote about her, and referred people to her. And the second person that talked about her that had a big impact in the social circles at that time, in terms of the royal family, was William Henry, who later became William IV, when he also was stationed in the Caribbean. And so impressed with the way Cuba Cornwallis nursed him, that he would tell people such as his wife, Queen Adelaide. And she actually sent Cuba a beautiful gown that Cuba refused to wear during her lifetime. She wanted it on her when she died. And that's the story. So I just want to just stress that, whilst a lot of my life at the moment is taken up with Mary Seacole, I think we need to know our history in terms of doctresses, and that's all I know. I'm sure I've given a couple of references to their works, examples, but there's a lot more. Now, one of the things that's argued by detractors of Mary Seacole is that, well, she never trained as a nurse. And what they're saying is she never went to a school of nursing and did a formal education program. Well, of course she didn't. And it really represents ignorance on the part of those people who say that, because the first established school of nursing in England, funded by the British public, by the way, because of the achievements of Florence Nightingale, was the Nightingale School of Nursing at St Thomas's Hospital. But that wasn't established until after the end of the Crimean War, in 1860. So how can Mary Seacole have trained as a nurse? Well, in England, there wasn't any school of nursing before the Crimean War. The second school of nursing was established in England in Liverpool in 1863. And if we look to the United States, it wasn't until 1873 that a similar school of nursing to St Thomas's was established. And of course, it also shows people don't understand even the relationship of Jamaica to Britain at that period, that Jamaica was a British colony. Just thought I'd mention that. Where did Mary learn her expertise? Again, people should read her autobiography. It is 19 chapters, and I think this is why some people, I'm going to say, are too lazy to read or just can't be bothered to read it. So-called historians who can't even take the trouble to read her autobiography, and yet are very quick to go into the public domain and say she wasn't this, she wasn't that, she wasn't the other. And you can read it free online. It's on the Project Gutenberg's online website, book, if you want to read books, and also on the Women's Library. So you can access it in two ways on the web. And if you read her, particularly her first chapter, she really praises the influence of her mother and how, as a child, she followed in her mother's footsteps. She observed her mother. She was obviously a very curious child and an intrepid child. She practiced on her doll and the dog, and the poor dog used to run away as soon as the dog saw Mary, because she was going to bandage and all sorts of things. And Mary even took medicines herself. I mean, she was quite sort of curious to know the effects of medicine. And look at her, she's saying, and whatever disease was most prevalent in Kingston, be sure my poor doll soon contracted it. So she was aware from what was going on in her mother's convalescent hotel, the Blundell Hall in Kingston, East Street, what was happening health-wise. And she was very observant as an adult, and she was in a way like a sponge, I feel, but she was very keen to learn from whatever sources were available, including doctors who came to stay at her mother's hotel and then her hotel. Also, when she was in Central America in the early 1850s, she ended up nursing a cholera outbreak because nobody else would do it. And she was so upset at the death of a 2-year-old, as she describes it, brown child with cholera. And she said that death, of all deaths that she had experienced up until the time, was the one that most affected her. And she was desperate to see if she could learn something that would improve the care she gave to future cholera victims, in particular children. So she got permission from the father to perform a post-mortem on this child in order to try and understand more. Now, a little bit about her social life. I'm sure you're probably aware of this, but she married in Jamaica in 1836 the godson of Lord Nelson, Edwin Horatio Seacole. And there's a big debate as to whether Mary actually ever had any children, and it's not really totally been resolved. She never talked about any children in her autobiography, and she never mentioned any children in her will, and yet she did leave. She was very generous in her bequests to family members in her will. Florence Nightingale, in correspondence that was unearthed not that long ago, alleges that Mary Seacole had a child, legitimate daughter by Colonel Bunbury. Jane Robinson, who did the 2005 biography and researched in the Caribbean, felt that this could not be substantiated. More information is coming, well, it could be this person or that person. At this point in time, we don't know. Another volunteer, French chef, who used to work at the Reform Club in London, who also went out to the Crimea on his own volition at his own expense, was a friend of both Mary Seacole and Florence Nightingale. And he, in his autobiography, refers to a daughter, Sally Sarah, who's actually is referred to as the maid in Mary Seacole's autobiography. And historians, Seacole specialists say, you have to remember that everybody referred to Mary Seacole as Mother Seacole or Auntie Seacole to go out to the Crimea. I've talked about some of them. There was a lot of yellow fever and cholera epidemics in Jamaica she was involved in. And so impressed with the British military authorities in Jamaica that they invited her to come and supervise nursing care at Uppark Camp, which of course in those days was the military headquarters in Kingston of the British Army. Now the other, so that was really sort of partly addressing, she wasn't a nurse, she wasn't recognised as a nurse. You'll see some other quotes from independent people that shows that she was recognised as a nurse. But I want to look at this issue of, did she consider herself more white than black? Did she look down on black people? Where did she, do we have anything about her views on race, racism? And again, I'm looking to her autobiography. The critics are saying she's not black because she's three quarters white. Even using terms which I find very, very insulting, such as quadroon, in this day and age. And I just find it interesting, it's white people telling us that Mary Seacole's not black, and that we shouldn't be interested in her, and that for her to have been voted in Patrick Vernon's Every Generation online poll in 2004 as the greatest Black Briton, that this shouldn't have happened because she's not black, and that basically it's the political correctness issue that's getting us to make mistakes about Mary Seacole. So let's look at, does she write anything about this? Because the sentence that the detractors use, they use half of a, they don't even use half, they use, I would suggest, an eighth of a paragraph that she starts to talk, I am a little brown. So if you just use it like that, it does look as though, well actually, you know, I'm not really dark, I'm just a little. But it's totally taken out of context. And I want to just show you some Oh, and also she's rude to her black cooks. So those are the two reasons that they say that she's not nice to black people and she doesn't consider herself, and that she really feels she's more Scottish than black. So let's have a look. She's talking about if she, Mary Seacole, has a little prejudice against our cousins across the Atlantic. She's talking about the Americans, and she confesses to a little. It's not unreasonable. I have a few shades of deeper brown upon my skin, which shows me related, and I am proud of the relationship, to those poor mortals whom you once held enslaved. She's talking to her British readers in a book that was published in 1857, when full abolition of slavery in Jamaica only occurred in 1838. And then she says, and whose bodies America still owns, with slavery not being abolished until the end of the Civil War in 1865. And having this bond, and knowing what slavery is, having seen with my eyes and heard with my ears, proof positive enough of its horrors, let others affect to doubt them if they will, is it surprising that I should be somewhat impatient of the airs of superiority which many Americans have endeavoured to assume over me? And if you read her autobiography, there's several examples. One is when she tries to, she purchases her tickets to sail from Central America back to Jamaica, and white American women on the boat, calling her the N-word, says she has no right to be on that boat. The captain is sympathetic to Mary Seacole, but he can see that this is just getting very difficult, and suggests to Mary that she might like to consider getting a boat that's owned by the British, that's following on and going on to Jamaica. She reluctantly decided to do that. And that's exactly what happened. She got on the. And there are other examples of her perception of race discrimination. So that's really what she's referring to there. Now, do you remember I talked about in the Crimea, she single-handedly nursed a cholera epidemic. She'd actually gone to Cruces in Panama. It was a gold prospecting town. She was a businesswoman. She was interested in running a hotel, similar to her brother, Edward, who was there at the time. And also, getting involved in the gold prospecting shares, possibly purchasing. But a cholera epidemic broke out. Nobody was addressing it properly. She rolled her sleeves up and helped an enormous amount of people. And as a result, there were a lot of Americans that she helped, and they held a dinner in her honour because of the care, the nursing care she gave them. And they were toasting her at this dinner. It was all going all right until one of them included in his speech this bit: if we could bleach her by any means we would, and thus make her as acceptable in any company as she deserves to be. Now again, if you read her autobiography, Edward, her brother, she's right there, is holding her down. I mean, she is fuming. You can imagine steam coming. She is so angry. And he said, Mary, remember, we're hosts here, calm down. She sort of takes a deep breath and doesn't say exactly what she wants to say, in the tone she wants to say, but she still says this: I must say that I don't altogether appreciate your friend's kind wishes with respect to my complexion. As to the society which the process might gain me admission into, all I can say is that, judging from the specimens that I've met with here and elsewhere, I don't think that I shall lose much by being excluded from it. So, gentlemen, I drink to you and the general reformation of American manners. She was, excuse the expression, please, pissed off with these people. Okay. Now, in chapter 6, I just read what happened. She's talking about a young African-American woman who, in Cruces, had been rescued from being bound hand and foot, naked, and being severely lashed by her cruel young American mistress. Having been freed, taken away from this dreadful state, she was presented before a magistrate, himself a man of colour. We're talking about the early 1850s now, who pronounced that she was free to leave her mistress. But the girl was so petrified of her mistress and also of losing her child that Seacole and others persuaded her, firstly to flee to freedom, and to enable her to do this, helped to purchase her child from the slave owner, this American woman. This does not strike me as somebody who has no interest in the African, as in this instance, the African-American slave situation. So let's move quickly on to the Crimean War. This is if you like, the second or the third phase of Mary's career, if you like. She was 49 when she decided she'd go out and offer her services to go to She decided to come to England because she'd heard about this campaign to recruit 40 nurses to work with Florence Nightingale at the Scutari Barrack Hospital, which it was in Turkey, across from where the Crimea was. There was a sea, so it was quite away from where the war zone was, but it was where the British soldiers were ultimately taken to with their severe injuries. Mary says, I made up my mind that if the army wanted nurses, they would be glad of me, and with all the ardour of my nature, which ever carried me where inclination probably, I decided that I would go to the Crimea. So she travelled to England. We don't know the exact date she arrived. Jane Robinson, in her biography, suggests that she might have come on a particular boat that landed in Southampton, so she would have then made her way to London. Around the time that Florence Nightingale was actually leaving for Crimea with for Scutari, I should say, with the first group of nurses. And Mary was a very astute networker. She realised the importance of letters of references. So you see one from a senior medical officer from Panama that she carried with her. But this is, of course, what many of us now, are aware of, was the rejections, 5 rejections that she experienced in London. She first of all went to the War Office, the Quartermaster General's Department, the Medical Department, and then she went to be seek interview as one of the nurses for the second group of nurses, because Florence Nightingale had actually already left London. She was never interviewed by Florence Nightingale. So this is one mistake that we often read about, that she was personally rejected by Florence Nightingale in London. It was one of Florence Nightingale's compatriots and friends, and this is what she had to say about that interview. She gave me the same reply, and I read in her face the fact that had there been a vacancy, I should not have been chosen to fill it. And this is when she wonders why, what's going on here. Did these ladies shrink from accepting my aid because my blood flowed between us beneath a somewhat duskier skin than theirs? Tears streamed down my foolish cheeks as I stood in the fast-thinning streets. Tears of grief that any should doubt my motives, that heaven should deny me the opportunity that I sought. And one of the reasons I admire Mary Seacole, and I think she has a relevance today for our communities, is she didn't give up. She was not over what she was depressed, she was devastated by this rejection, but she didn't give up. And so she said, well, if they don't want me, basically, I will, upon my own responsibility and at my own cost. And she would network with people who knew her from Jamaica, doctors, generals. This again shows you Mary Seacole had the confidence to move between various echelons in society. And all those levels of society seem to admire Mary Seacole. So why not go and open a hotel? That's what she was used to doing, and so that's what she did. She raised the necessary funds. And so she didn't arrive in Turkey until the spring of 1855, and she immediately went to the hospital where Florence Nightingale was supervising the nurses, Barrack Hospital in Scutari, and she didn't want a job from Florence Nightingale, although the first person she met was a colleague of Florence Nightingale's, who assumed she wanted work with Florence Nightingale. Again, read her autobiography. She gives short shrift to that woman and said, no, I'm not looking for a job. I want to see Miss Nightingale. And what she wanted to see Miss Nightingale was to get help with accommodation overnight, because she realised it was far too late to try and get across now to the Crimea, because Mary had made up her mind that she would be of more use nursing the soldiers in the war zone than so far out at Scutari. So Florence Nightingale sorted out a room for her. And on the left is what Mary Seacole really wanted to try and do in the Crimea. And this is why there's a little bit of confusion about, did she set up you think the British Hotel, and she talks in her card, visiting card that she had printed before she set out. She had hoped it would be quarters for the sick and convalescent officers, etc. But when she actually arrived, eventually, she didn't have as much money. She had to use the flotsam and jetsam of the ships that had been sunken and were in the harbour. And she sort of put together this wooden hut, basically, a big wooden hut, but that's what the British Hotel was. It didn't actually provide accommodation as she would have liked. What she did there, though, was provide food, a store, and a nursing dispensary. Soldiers used to come every morning, and she'd give them the potions, her potions, Creole medicine, herbs, and other local herbs, probably for cholera, for dysentery, and she was very well recognised for this. But then in the afternoon she would go out to the war zone or across the road to the Land Transport Corps, both, in fact, she'd do both. And she'd go to the soldiers' huts as it went along to the war zone, and then she went onto the battlefields itself as well. And now, a lot of that has been from her autobiography. There are over 32 independent references about Mary Seacole and her work. And a lot of it comes from journalists, and very eminent journalists, such as William Howard Russell, the Crimean War correspondent for the Times newspaper. And look what he has to say. I've seen her go down under fire with her little store of creature comforts for our wounded men, and a more tender or skillful hand without a wound or a broken limb could not be found amongst our best surgeons. And Punch magazine also talks very highly of her as well. I'm conscious of time. But Florence Nightingale had mixed views about Mary Seacole, and this is in a letter that she wrote to her brother-in-law, who was an MP, where it seems he must have been asking for her views about Mary Seacole. And this is in 1870, so it's a decade or so after the Crimean War had finished. But interestingly enough, she asks for the page, that page, that you should burn it. So I think she was very conscious of her PR and spin, if you like. But we're very lucky, I think, that he didn't burn that page, because she does actually give more of her real feelings, mixed feelings about Mary Seacole here. Well, Mrs. Seacole, I dare say you know more about it than I do. She kept, I will not call it a bad house, but something not very unlike it in the Crimean War. She was very kind to the men, and what is more, to the officers, and did some good, and made many drunk. A shameful, ignorant imposture was practised on the Queen, who subscribed to the Seacole testimonial. And that's all that historians can find out, is that Florence Nightingale seems to be very annoyed that Queen Victoria subscribed to this Seacole testimonial, because Mary Seacole was bankrupt, of course, after the war. So she wasn't really that happy. And then Robinson came across in her research this undated documentation between Florence and her sister Parthenope, who was recording it, because Florence Nightingale was bedridden after the war. Now here, Florence refers to Mary as a woman of bad character, who kept a bad house, and who had to be discouraged from visiting a sick Florence in Balaclava in order to quack her.
When she says a bad house, is she trying to make up that Seacole was a prostitute or a hoe, wasn't that?
That she was running a brothel. She was running a brothel. So as we said, the war, as you probably know, the war finished very quickly. Mary had provisions that she had bought in, which she could not get money back for, and so she faced bankruptcy when she came back. And what was very interesting was the journalists that so admired her took it upon themselves to publicise the dire financial straits that Mary Seacole found herself in after the war when she came back to London. And the response was such that these were soldiers and others who, you know, the war was still fresh in their minds and recalled how she cared for them. And they rallied round. Punch magazine, the Times newspaper, London Illustrated Gazette. I mean, there was all these media and the military and the royal family that came in her support. And this is an incredible one. For 4 days in July of 1857 on the banks of the River Thames, at what was the Royal Surrey Gardens Music Hall, a military gala was held in her honour, and a total of 80,000 people attended that gala. Now 80,000 is, as Simon Woolley worked out, the size of the Olympic Millennium Stadium. So, you know, that many people would take the trouble to come and to honour her. And this is so William Howard Russell is writing the preface to Mary Seacole's autobiography. And I just find it interesting that amongst it he says, I should have thought that no preface would have been required to introduce Mrs. Seacole to the British public. And in fact, recent research has shown that there are numerous references to her in the British Victorian newspapers, because the British Library has now digitalised much of the Victorian newspaper stock. So it's much easier for researchers to go in and sit and do searches on anything, including Mary Seacole. Now Mary died in London on the 14th of May, 1881, at the age of 76, from apoplexy, which is the term for stroke. And in her will, she requested that she be buried in St Mary's Catholic Cemetery in Kensal Green, London. And the obituaries appeared in the Times, and there it said, the deceased, it will be remembered, greatly distinguished herself as a nurse on the battlefield and in hospitals during the Crimean War. And the Daily Gleaner, the Jamaican Daily Gleaner, stated that she received English, French, Russian and Turkish decorations. Now, by the late 60s, 1960s I should say, nobody knew where she was buried. She had been so forgotten about, particularly in this country, not in Jamaica, but even in Jamaica they weren't sure where she was buried. And there was a hunt that went on, and then somebody managed to get hold of a copy of her will and see where she had asked to be buried. And then there was a search apparently in the cemetery, and you can imagine the state of the grave because nobody was looking after it. So Jamaican nurses and others rallied round. Jamaican High Commissioner at the time, High Commissioner, raised money to get a better headstone, and it had this engraving. And you should keep your eye on the press. Around the week of the 14th of May each year, an association called the Mary Seacole Memorial Association, which was established in the 1980s. They started from 1981, 100 years after her death, a procession and a wreath-laying ceremony at her grave, and that continues to this day. So if you're interested in taking children to it or going yourself, just keep a lookout around that. If you go onto my own Mary Seacole site, which is maryseacole.com, as soon as I get notification of the date, I put it up on the events page section. Now there's this whole thing about medals. There is one person who's claiming that if Mary Seacole was alive today, she'd be in prison because she's falsely wearing medals. I mean, it's at that level some of the detractors have written material. And so that was one of the areas that I decided to spend most of my time when I was doing this article commissioned by Operation Black Vote, because nobody had really pulled together what is actually a sort of detective story about Mary Seacole's medals. What evidence do we have of the medals that... I've just pulled together here some images of where you see her wearing medals. This is... you'll be familiar with this. If you're not, please go down to the National Portrait Gallery. This was a lost portrait and discovered by Helen Rappaport, the historian, and it went up in the National Portrait Gallery in 2005. And now the National Portrait Gallery own it. It's quite a small... How many of you have seen it?
It actually features on the Trafalgar Square Walk. So if you do Trafalgar Square Walk, actually showed that.
There you go. So join Tony's walk and you'll see it. So that's... You can see she's wearing medals on that, of course. Then this is a bust that was done by the half-nephew of Queen Victoria, Count Glycon. And it's now... It's housed in the Institute of Jamaica in Kingston. And you can see she's wearing medals here. And then this is a photograph that was only discovered in 2009 in the library of Winchester Public School. You know, Mary gets around, doesn't she? In the nicest possible way. What I say. I hope you've had time to see some of the references. This is in more detail in my article. It's given where our reference is made to Mary Seacole's medals during her lifetime. And so one is at her bankruptcy hearing, the Times reporter notes that Mary, the lady of colour, and I find this interesting. Several times her colour is noticed, because some of the detractors are saying, nobody ever noticed her colour. Okay? All right. Sorry. And, where was I trying to... So, they just say that she appeared honoured with 4 government medals, government kindness to the British soldiery. And Alexandra and Nzingha, these are very, very important women in respect to the story of Mary Seacole coming back to life. Ziggy Alexander, who was then a librarian in Willesden Library in Brent, and Audrey Dewji, who worked for Ealing Community Relations at the time, brought out the very first edition of Mary Seacole's autobiography after her 1857 original one. And they brought it out in 1984. And that's certainly when I and others first heard of Mary Seacole. So I always like to pay tribute to these 2 women for their contribution to Mary Seacole's place now. And I've made reference to this already, and the David Lena obituary. And I put in red French and Turkish medals because those 2 medals are in the Institute of Jamaica, and they have been recognised by medal experts as the real, authentic medals. Because Jane Robinson and now others have said that the medals that she's wearing are dress medals, miniature medals. And this is where... Now the reason why, again, read my story, it's all there, my article. What I've really worked out is that, well, I'll come to it in a minute. These are the pictures of of Mary Seacole's 2 medals that remain, and they are in the Institute of Jamaica in Kingston. So if any of you are going to Jamaica, get down to the Institute of Jamaica, because that's where you'll see them. And one is the French Légion d'Honneur, the French Legion of Honour, and one is the Turkish Order of the Medici. I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. But they have been authenticated. Now, to be fair to some of these people who think, well, Jane Robinson, let's pick on Jane Robinson. When she went to Jamaica and went to the Institute of Jamaica, they couldn't find, they said they couldn't at that point find the medals. And there are some other people who have been to Jamaica and the medals were not accessible. And also, Jane Robinson didn't see the photograph. Those people who have seen the photograph and also the medals as well have authenticated them as the real things. So, in addition, let me just check, I'm not sure what I've got next. Look, if we go back to the, I can't remember which one's the Turkish, because I'm not into military medals, I have to be honest. I think it's this one, yeah. The one on the right is the Turkish Order of the Nzingha, and there are, in 2009, two Dutch researchers, Doctors Corrie and Jerome Starring-Dirks, became interested in Mary Seacole quite a few years ago. Corrie is a medical doctor that teaches student nurses in Holland, and her husband is a mathematician, but they're amateur historians. And Corrie had always had an interest in Florence Nightingale, can understand she was teaching student nurses. When she came to London and they stayed with an English naval historian friend in London, Corrie asked a question about Florence Nightingale, and he said, well, have you heard about this woman called Mary Seacole? I think you'll find her story very interesting. And as soon as they read about her, they fell in love with her story. And they have since then been spending all their spare money, all their holidays, researching Mary Seacole. Their story is incredible. And they have unearthed some true discoveries about Mary Seacole. They are the ones that saw the medals when they went to Jamaica. They were shown the medals. They got a copy of the photograph, which is in Corrie's Dutch version of Mary Seacole's autobiography, which has got 202 pages of research findings before the autobiography begins. So they are an incredible couple. But when they came to the British Library, do you remember I talked about the Victorian media? They unearthed, I think it's 4 references, I mentioned them in my article, to British newspapers in 1856, I think it's May 1856, so just as the war has finished, of Mary Seacole being honoured by the Turkish government with, guess what, the Order of the Nzingha. That was only unearthed in 2009. So for the Turkish medal, I would argue we've got all the evidence we need. There's the authenticated medal, there is the newspaper records of when she was presented with that medal by the Turkish government in the Crimea. It was the Turkish military that presented it for her services to Turkish soldiers. Now, the French Legion of Honor has been authenticated, but to date, nobody has been able to find a record of her being awarded that medal. So there's still research to be done. And so here, what I've tried to put up is, in addition, after her death, she was awarded in 1990 the Jamaican Order of Merit. But to date, even though reference has been made, as you see, that she was awarded the British Crimea Medal, and there have been personal recollections of those who saw Mary Seacole of her wearing the Crimean War Medal after the war, there's no record of her being awarded it, and nobody has found that medal. Also the same with the Sardinian Crimean War Medal. Don't know who she was, where the medal is, where the reference is. But interestingly enough, when the Dutch couple were in Jamaica looking at the medals, the then curator mentioned that Mary Seacole had been awarded a Russian medal after her death, but nobody knows where it is. So we've got an issue of lost memorabilia, if you like. But you can't just turn around and say Mary Seacole's a liar and she should be in jail for wearing medals she didn't do. That is lazy. It's not even research. Sorry, I get angry at that point. So I think we're nearly there. Increased recognition, you've seen the film, for example, Horrible Histories, going through quickly. Now, very quickly, last couple of slides, the proposed changes that we're looking. This is a lovely story, you know, because the petition started on Facebook. How many of you signed the petition here? Yes, that's what I like to see. some background as to how it started. Remember, 29th of December, 31st of December, these Daily Mail articles, different times. Lester Holloway, some of you may know Lester Holloway, he's a journalist. He had actually also worked at Operation Black Vote at some time. And on his Facebook page, he shared this link from Operation Black Vote, who highlighted this leaked document, about Mary Seacole coming out of it. Just to clarify something, it's quite interesting that Mary Seacole in the current curriculum is only optional. It's Key Stage 2 or Key Stage 3. Any teachers here, you know which? Or, you know? And it's Key Stage 2, and it's under famous Victorian people. And examples are given in the note from the Department of Education to teachers about some famous Victorian people that teachers might like to teach children about. Includes Florence Nightingale and Mary Seacole. So it's optional. But you know, you don't let something like that get in the way of a good petition. And so I'll come to that in a minute. So Lester posted this. Kai Rafe, I don't know if you know Kai, she's an activist in Lambeth, Unison member. This is how it started. She responds, as you do on Facebook, Lester, can we set up an online petition? More than happy to help. That's how the petition started. Then Lester drew a few of us behind the public image of Facebook, you know, the private messaging section, and Simon Woolley of Operation Black Vote agreed to host the petition via change.org, that you may know does a lot of petitions on lots of issues. And there was a group of us that supported this, and myself, Patrick Vernon, Every Generation, Zita Holborn, an activist, she's with PCS, I think, Civil Servant Union, and Juliet Alexander, who, like me, is a trustee of the Mary Seacole Memorial Statue here, and a journalist as well, former journalist. And that was what the petition said. It was addressed to Michael Gove, Secretary of State for Education, keep Mary Seacole on the national curriculum. Now, don't forget, the discussion started on the 2nd of January on Facebook. And we were thinking, we were aware that, as you've said, we were aware that there was a whole issue in terms of black history. Because in Michael Gove's leaked letter to the Daily Mail, he particularly picks on Mary Seacole and Oluwaduekuyana as examples of Labour putting those individuals in for politically correct reasons. Okay? So we had to quickly decide, and we did make a decision that we would focus on Mary Seacole, but it was in the broader context of black historical issues that we would want our children being taught about. So just to explain how come it only focused, but this was a rapid decision. Now, the petition started, okay, so you can see 36,015 people signed that petition. And Tony, I worked very hard this weekend on doing this graph, because I haven't done much ACA work for this, and so I'd upgraded my Excel program in between, and it took me a little bit of time to work out how you do these graphs, but actually once you get a head around and Google queries, but I think you might, it is quite interesting to see that it started on the 3rd of January. It's very difficult, I do need to. Oh, hold on, I can do it from here. Can you hear me still?
Yes, yes.
Okay. It started on the 3rd of January, and by the next day, 2,000 people had signed this petition. And really, it went viral, you could argue, on the 10th of January, because, I can't read this. 10th? Yeah. On the 10th of January, 6,000 people had signed it. On the 11th of January, 10,000 people had signed it. Actually, probably you could argue it may have gone viral on the 11th of January, because by the next day, 20,000 people had signed it. Then it goes up to... Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Then it goes up to 25,000 the next day. The next day it goes up to 30,000. And then it starts to, if you like, taper off. Having said that, 31,000 on the 15th of January, and 25th of January, 35,000 people. And on the 8th of February, it was decided to close, Operation Black Vote decided to close the petition because the day before we discovered via Twitter that the curriculum proposed framework was out for consultation until the end of April. I think people do need to look at it, Google that, because there's some very serious issues that have still got to be addressed. Yes, there was a victory in the sense that Mary Seacole and Oluwaru Equiano are mandated now in the new proposed curriculum. Mary Seacole is in a section on women, and Oluwaru Equiano is in another section in terms of, I don't know the details, sorry, he's there. So in fact, they're actually more embedded in the curriculum, the proposed curriculum, than they were in the current curriculum. However, there are sections of what is in the current curriculum that have been taken out of the proposed curriculum in terms of African history, early history, etc. And I'm sure Tony and Nia can talk more about that. But, you know, I think this is quite an interesting story of how people are angry enough and get their act together and use the tools such as the social media. Things can happen. So just to conclude, whilst we're really pleased about that, Mary Seacole still hasn't one statue in the world. And here's her admirer, the journalist, saying he trusts that England will not forget her. Well, England did forget her. 10 years ago, when I was doing this, I thought, oh my God, 10 years ago. But she hasn't got one statue in the world, still. And so, 10 years ago, towards the end of the year, some of you may remember the late Mrs. Connie Mark. She was very, very inspirational. She lived in Hammersmith, Shepherd's Bush, and she was a constituent of Clive Seacole, who was then the MP. And she took him down to Mary Seacole's grave, got him on bended knees with her to clean the grave, and pointed out that's the only memorial, and doesn't Mary Seacole deserve better? And that's the story of how Clive's Lord Surrey now set up the appeal after he had stepped down as an MP. So where are we? The guys in St Thomas's have given us a plot of land in the gardens, a nice prominent site overlooking Westminster Bridge and the Houses of Parliament. Chosen the artists from a competition where we ensured that there was a diverse selection of artists. Planning permission was given April last year. We are now halfway we've raised £250,000. We've just received an £80,000 sponsorship from a construction company. We still need, I think it's going to be less than half than this amount, because Mary Seacole is now a popular cause and people are coming forward with expressions of interest for sponsorship. So much so that the sculpture, the foundry, the construction people, also the statue is going to go up by the end of next year. Okay? And this is actually a computer-generated image of what it will look like when we raise the remainder of the funds. It's going to be 10-foot bronze statue, and this has upset a few of Mary's detractors because I think it's going to be 4 inches, 3 inches, 5 inches higher than Florence Nightingale's statue. Having said that, I have to say the Florence Nightingale Museum in the grounds of St Thomas Hospital fully support the siting of Mary Seacole's statue. So, you know, there are certain detractors, but not all are linked with Florence Nightingale. And we've got lots and lots of supporters, we don't have time. If any of you wanted to purchase this book that I was commissioned to write by the Royal College of Nursing, I have a few copies here. They're £5, and I've signed them, and every penny goes to the appeal. And you can also buy a little pin for £1, postcard with this glorious photograph of Mary Seacole for £1. And you could come to some fundraising concerts. On the left-hand side, I've got flyers for the London Adventist Chorale singing a song for Seacole, a concert of spirituals and gospels, Union Chapel, Sunday 24th March. And it's going to be introduced by one of our ambassadors, Rudolph Walker, otherwise known as Patrick from EastEnders. And so please, you can book your tickets online. Please support us with this. And then on the 10th of April, one of our other ambassadors, Courtney Pine, the internationally recognised jazz artist, of course, he's playing live at Brixton Jam. All the funds of both of these events are in aid of the appeal. Finally, this doesn't cost you anything. Get your phones out, get onto your Facebook and Twitter page, and follow us, please, both on Facebook and on Twitter. And this is my final slide. Nia, seriously. Look, please, Nia. Good. Pulling faces at me over there. This is my daughter and my granddaughter. Somebody was asking about my daughter. She's actually an actress. I don't know whether any of you follow Casualty, BBC Casualty. She's the feisty receptionist Louise. Ta-da. And that's my little granddaughter. And basically what this slide is, this is a picture of the statue of John Betjeman at St Pancras Station. This was done by the same artist that is doing the Mary Seacole statue. I mean, we've really got a world-class artist to do sculpture, I should say. And basically, I want to see her generation, my granddaughter's generation, and others able to go down to St Thomas's Hospital in the gardens and touch the statue of Mary Seacole, and that we can all be proud in having contributed to, even if it's £1 to that statue. When you touch it, you've contributed. Thank you very much.
We can squeeze in 10 minutes for questions, so 10 minutes for questions, put your hands up, and off you go.
Yeah, at least one thing I know as a medical scientist, because when she did that unfortunate autopsy on one of the patients, she was actually performing, also contributing to the science of treating tropical diseases as well. Because I read that, in fact, the treatments that she was used by the medical profession into sort of near the middle of the last century as well, before antibiotics. So I'm going to put her as a scientist, because unfortunately there's been this propagated myth that the black community is against science. There's this idea that we don't like science or we're not good at science. So I think it's a shame that you did not put that as well, especially as as there's not many black women in science as well. So I wondered what was the reason for that.
I just didn't put it. It's never even crossed my mind, because I felt that what I'm trying to show is the multitude of her contributions. And you've proven that I've done it, because you picked up the fact that I've talked about the fact that she did personal. I haven't had time to talk about the fact that in her autobiography she talked about the fact that Creole doctresses of her kind were aware that cholera was contagious before others were. I mean, there's so many examples. You write about it, sir. Come on. Let's share the burden of this between us. All right. Good, it's a good point. I'm not. Sorry. Question over that. Thank you.
But when you said that they wanted to remove her from the curriculum, was it just that note?
Yes.
That was all that was on the curriculum?
Yeah.
She's an example.
And
how much information has now been mandated about her?
Well, she's cited as somebody who should be taught about in this section. So it's a very fact is, her name is there. I mean, let's put it all in perspective. There is a war of philosophy, politics going on, I think, in terms of, and even this morning, apparently, I just as before I was leaving, I just checked the Twitter account, and David Starkey had a go at Mary Seacole today. So I think she's one of these individuals that people like to take a pop at, and we have to recognise that. But again, going back to this Queen Nzinga series of black female academics, this is the way we contribute to the knowledge base. We don't have to get into a silly tittle-tattle war. She said, he said, what said, he said. I don't work like that. I get angry, yes. But I decided I would respond to Simon Woolley's invitation. It was hard work, I can tell you. But I decided, yes, thank you, Simon, I will. Because now, today, before I left, as I said, I see people tweeting about Starkey this and Starkey that. So I tweeted from Seacole statue the link to that article that says she was a nurse, that she abhorred slavery, and she earned medals. And it's been retweeted. So, you know, we just have to do as much as we can with the tools we've got.
Any more questions? Person, off you go.
Is there any information about her in Scotland?
Oh, that is
Good
a fantastic question.
Very
Well
good.
done. Yes, they're starting now. They've been a bit slow to be off. There are certain individuals in Scotland who are really trying to raise their profile. But I'm going up. Unison, the big union, have given our charity a free stand at the Unison Health Conference in Glasgow in April. And that's when I think we'll make even more connections with organisations, because that's what we need. People in Scotland on our behalf have tried to get the Scottish minister interested and this person interested, Grant's Whiskey people, you know, individuals have tried, but we haven't got Mary Seacole, as far as I'm concerned, embedded in Scotland. Having said that, she has appeared, there have been articles in Scottish newspapers about Mary Seacole, but a heck of a lot more could be done in Scotland. Thank you. Very good question.
Any other questions? Alright, fine, let's see. In that case, thank you very much for coming house.